So excited to start off by letting Renee introduce herself, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Thank you, Sri, so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today and just have all the connections that I know, learn about you and all your amazing work. My name is Renae Bryant. Call me Renee. And I have the pleasure just recently of being board approved as the new assistant superintendent for Gorman Learning Charter Network. It's a charter network that encompasses 7 different counties. It's amazing work to really make sure that all of our scholars and families have the choices that they want. It is a public charter, so we have all the same mandates and regulations as traditional public schools like you and I attended. And yeah, I'm just super excited. Before that, I served as a director of plurilingual services for Anaheim Union High School District. And then before that, I was with Westminster School District as director of the Office of Language Acquisition before being recruited by Michael Matsuda to Anaheim. And then I spent my teaching years and site administrative years at Corona Norco. And I've had the privilege of also serving as a bilingual instructional assistant in the beginning of my career. And right now, as I'm an assistant superintendent, I've also for the past, I think it's like 4 years, been an adjunct professor for Cal State Fullerton, my alma mater for my doctorate, University of Laverne. They've started a new program in educational leadership for a
Oh,
doctorate in ed leadership. If 5-year-old scholars can learn online, adults can too, right? So now the universities are moving some of their doctoral programs to online programs, and University of Laverne is leading the way with that. So they have a 2-year doctoral program all online. It's kind of nonstop, to be quite frank. It starts in the late spring, summer of 1 year, goes full, like all the way through to the second year. You were highly discouraged from doing that because you didn't want bias, things like that. But the new way of educational doctorates are dissertations in practice, because the point of getting a doctorate in education is so that you can make a positive difference for your scholars, staff, families, and communities that you actually serve. I have a podcast called the Your Story Matters podcast, and I've been doing that for it's a year anniversary this month. And before
okay.
that, in 2023, co-author of the book behind me, Lynette White and I started the Ed Branding podcast. And so we did that for a good year and a half, I think, before the book came out as kind of a runway for the book. Shout out to Adam Welcome, who told us, you need a runway for your book. And so we did that and had a really great time interviewing, having conversations with people around education. And yeah, so an author, co-author of this book, the Ed Branding book, How to Build Educational Leadership with Social Influence on DBC, Dave Burgess Consulting, so I guess you would say Inc. And really great relationship with him. And as an announcement, myself and 3 other co-authors just have signed our names on a contract for a publishing deal around sister circles. And so leadership, we're really excited to be working on this project with Dr. Mary Lou Ryder. She's actually a graduate of University of Laverne too, and she's a professor at UMass Global. And so she started a boutique, a publishing company, really started with publishing her own work when, a decade ago, I think it was 2012, so more than a decade ago, she published a really popular book called The Rules of the Game. That's what it is. The Rules of the Game, How to Win. And it's really catered towards women, right? Because women make up the majority of education, but don't make up the majority of at least executive cabinet and superintendent positions. So yeah, so we're super excited. Mary Lou has probably more than 30 books. She's expanded now to including other authors, and we're so excited to be a part of not only I'm so excited to be a part of the DBC family, but now I get multiple families, like lots of integrated families love that. And so now I'm a part of the Del Mar family as well. So that will come out. Our deadline is May, so we're looking at a fall release for that book. So I think that's enough that everyone needs to know. I'm very passionate about education. Public education is what changed my trajectory from my own personal story. So I know the power of public education, and that's why I'm so passionate about it and definitely passionate about helping women as well to be able to find their way to leadership and education.
I love that. What really kind of, I think one of the things that kind of stood out to me, and first of all, congratulations on the new role. That's such a
Thank
big
you.
deal. I'm so excited, especially it's the best way to start off the new year. So props to you. The one question I have for you is, can you talk a little bit about your journey into education and like what gave you that? Was it like a mentor? Was it a starting point? Were you always just like, this is my path, my calling? Or like, talk to me a little bit about that journey leading up into where you are now.
Yeah, so I think that what really has formed me as an educator, like I said, is it changed my trajectory, public education, and I think that really made me think about how I could make a difference like others made a difference for me. So my own personal journey is from kindergarten until 7th grade. I attended a different school every single year. I've told this story a lot, so it's not like a first time thing and trigger warnings and all those things, but most people would think, "Oh, it's because you're a military kid, right?" But no, actually, my mom was a single mother, and she was making sure that we were far away from my biological father, so moving and sealing records because there was a history of violence and abuse in the home. That started from when I was a little kid, and then at 5 years old, was taken away by CPS, not directed at me, but directed at my mother. And so my parents, both my bio dad and my mom, fought to get me back, and they did get me back. But then my mom made the wise decision to leave him, and people need to do what's best for their children and themselves and their safety. And so, yeah, my mom worked from being a city secretary to a county secretary to the state secretary and having those positions, to try to earn more money for us. And so each time she'd have to move. And so we definitely were moving about every single year. So started out in Vallejo, moved. I mean, it's really interesting when I meet people from all over California. I'm like, I live there. I went to this school, and they're like, I know that school. So yeah, and so the last big move that we made was Sacramento, and then my mom got remarried, and then that brought us to the Corona Norco area, and that's when my schooling stabilized. But those journeys from kindergarten to 7th, every time my mom walked me into a school, and everyone has to remember that frame of time. Like, single moms weren't as prevalent as they are today, so was a lot of judgment. But the schools that we walked into, they welcomed me with open arms, from the principal to this classified staff to the teachers, because usually I was coming in mid-year. I wasn't starting at the beginning of the year. Custodians, everyone. I mean, everyone played a role in making sure when we talk about community schools, I feel like that existed then in Northern California and Central California in the areas that I lived in. And so, yeah, I mean, changed my trajectory. They saw me not with deficits, but, for added value. My mom was very demanding. She'd walk in and say, "My daughter is gifted, so you need to challenge her." And I think sometimes that just sets the precedent right there, right? The high expectations. And so then when I went to Corona Norco, kudos to Corona Norco Unified School District. There wasn't GATE back in the day, but there was honor, so they put me in honors right away, and then that led to an advanced placement track, and then, I was able to get letters of recommendation for scholarships, which my parents had sat me down and said, "We will not be able to afford to send you to college." And, they didn't know because they didn't go to 4 years, they didn't know about grants, and they didn't know about all these things, so they said, "If you wanna go, like, you have to find a way." And so, yeah, I was lucky to be recommended for scholarships, which I got the Riverside Scholars Scholarship. It took me from RCC to UC Riverside, and then wound up, going and just a little caveat, I actually was raised a Southern Baptist, and so I really wanted to go to CBU, which is California Baptist University, but my parents were like, "We can't afford that." So yeah, and I was like, "I'm gonna be a missionary because I was in this acting group at church where you would do things for the community, and so yeah, so I went from one style of education to going to a UC, which I had a Spanish major, so this was about my major. So my major was Spanish, and with that major, you had to have a minor, and so it was Latin American Studies and Ethnic Studies, and so that really broadened my viewpoint about education as well, about education that I didn't receive. I was really upset to know that Christopher Columbus was not a hero because I was not taught that when I was a kid. And I was like, what? He did a gold quota? He chopped off people's hands? What? And so that, having to read and getting to read books like The Open Veins of Latin America and our place in the United States and Latin America, the history of that. I'll leave it there. and so all of that, then I was able to, get a BCLAD teaching credential on this Title VII grant for teachers back in the day. Started out as a bilingual transitional teacher and then worked my way up. But that is definitely my story of how I became interested in being an educator. I want to be able to make the same positive difference that all of those educators made in my life. And it's breaks my heart that, probably a lot of them don't know, but that's the thing that everyone should know that's listening. If you're in education, you may not always have kids that come back, maybe they pass through, but just know you are making a tremendous difference every day in their lives.
Role. I know you're in a new role now, but I want to talk a bit about that previous role where, you had that first introduction, you were working a lot and you were committed to plurilingual learners. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that role looked like for you? Give me a little bit of background on it. And even just talk to me a little bit about how your kind of career transitioned throughout working through so many different districts. And you name dropped so many at the start. And I was like, oh my goodness, like that's amazing. So talk to me a little bit about that career trajectory as well. Moving through these districts, the different students you've encountered, and how your career is also shaped differently, throughout that journey.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I left out was in Norco. That's when I first took Spanish. It seems like, oh, Norco, what? But I actually took Spanish language. I think the first time actually was in Sacramento. It was a semester course. Then when I went to Norco Junior, they put me in Spanish again. And I was fascinated with language. I loved learning language. When I was in third grade at one of the schools, they made us memorize sign language, at least the letters. And so that was like my first experience with language, then Spanish. And I went up all the way to Spanish 5 in high school, where they had to actually like combo us and have us sit outside, which is completely illegal, but they did it anyway. Like, we trust you seniors to be out there having conversations in Spanish. Okay. So, yeah. And then, being a Spanish major, coming out, in the late 90s to be a teacher. Then we had something called Prop 227. And so Prop 227, I take that back. Actually, when I was just out of college and I was an intern teacher getting my BCLAD, there was no Prop 227 yet. So bilingual education did exist at that time. There was no kind of governing rules around them. What existed at that point when I got my first job in San Bernardino City Unified School District for 3 years as an intern teacher and then being a credentialed teacher was as a transitional bilingual teacher. And so what that was is that model of bilingualism was you would have scholars taught in Spanish from kindergarten to third, and then they would transition to bilingual or to English only. They would just drop them in English only. So K was Spanish instruction, fourth grade, English only. So at the time, that's what the research recommended. Now we know now that that's not the best model, but at the time, that was the model. And so I would be the fourth grade teacher receiving those scholars because I had the Spanish background. I was a good transition for them. And so then I got my BCLAD, wound up going to Corona Norco. In that time, though, when I was still with San Bernardino, Prop 227 passed. And so Prop 227 was the UNS initiative, which was an English-only law. But what it said was that parents have an option of what they want. They can choose transitional bilingual. They can choose dual language immersion. They can choose English. English only will be the choice for them unless their parents choose something else. So what's really sad at that time is most schools just got rid of all of their Spanish books. You saw them in recycling bins. It's very heartbreaking. But when I went over to Corona Norco, I went as a sheltered English immersion teacher. So I would have most of the newcomer scholars and would teach ELD. And Yeah, then going, I this is a path, right? This is a passion, right? I remember I wanted to be a missionary. My plan was like to go to Mexico. Like, so this is all kind of, my mom always says, like, even though you didn't become a missionary, like your mission has been to help scholars, right? And so definitely a feeling that language is empowerment, not in a white savior type of way, but language and knowledge is empowerment. So trying to make a positive difference so that scholars see their language as an asset and as English as another opportunity for them. And so, yeah, one door after another opened around empowering scholars. And so, going from a site leadership role as Title VII, Title III, Title I coordinator and leader, to then going to Westminster. So Westminster is very famous for the case of Mendez versus Westminster. It is the case that desegregated schools in California. So we all know Brown v. Ed, and that was 1954, but Mendez versus Westminster was 1947. So this case was actually a precedent for that case. And California desegregated schools early. Although we are sad about our history, there is a point to be proud of. Okay, we did this, like this family, let's uplift this family. So this family is in, the history standards. They are a part of the ethnic study standards. And so it's a celebration in Westminster. And so going there, I was hired to roll out the first Vietnamese dual language immersion program in the state. And you're probably wondering, do you speak Vietnamese, Ray? I don't.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you.
Right? So they said, "Okay, you're gonna roll this out, and you're gonna roll out Spanish dual language immersion. You are going to be the EL program coordinator." So I started out as a program coordinator, working with teams and leading teams. This is also my first year in my doctoral program, which was all about knowing myself as a leader. The second year was about leading teams. Third year was about leading organizations. It's like the years of the doctoral program really empowered me to be able to do this work. So got teams together, listened. We all know as leaders, we have to listen. If we don't listen, we're not going to be successful for scholars. And so I listened to the people who were closest to the community, and they said, "Renae, you have to get out there and shake hands and go to events, and people need to know you and trust you." And I did that work. I dedicated nights and weekends and filled up 2 classes with the help of teams, right? We all were out there spreading the good word. And so now Westminster, they have a Golden Bell for their Vietnamese program. They have the Seal of Excellence from CABE for their Vietnamese program. It's very successful. The school is now completely Vietnamese dual language immersion, and it feeds into the junior high where they have Vietnamese dual language immersion as well. So proud. And of course, not of course, but 9 months later, I was very honored by my superintendent, Dr. Marion Kim Phelps, at the time at Westminster, to be promoted as it was executive director of the Office of Language Acquisition. And so then I got to build a whole department and team, and that was amazing. Roll out the ELD standards. And so all that work got the attention of Michael Matsuda. So he
Yeah.
said, "Hey." And at that time, Marion Kim Phelps, she did go to Poway to become the new superintendent there. So it was a perfect chance to go to a high school district with 26,000 students, 6,000 long-term English learners, or that many long-term English learners, and to be able to make a positive difference there. So there at Anaheim Union, I was able to do the same thing, work with rolling out the integrated designated ELD standards. But this time I had world languages, 8 world languages, everything from Arabic to Vietnamese, which we were able to add during my time there. And then we added that the second year. And the third year, we added Vietnamese dual language immersion. And then we added, there was 2 sites with Spanish dual language immersion. And now there are 8 sites with Spanish dual language immersion. So really proud of the work. We increased the number of reclassified students there to over 1,000 each year. We increased the number of scholars earning the state seal of biliteracy to over 1,000 each year in multiple languages. So we started out with maybe 10 languages earning state seal of biliteracy. And by the time I left, we were up to 17 different languages. And so this is a little commercial for everyone out there. You don't have to offer 17 languages in your district in order for those scholars to earn those state awards. And I say this because every single state in the United States offers a state seal of biliteracy. This is something you could add to your college resume. You could add for employers to know that you were completely biliterate in English and another language, and so we were able to use a testing service. If anyone's interested, it's ALTA Testing Service and Language to show that even though we offered 8 languages, 9 other heritage languages those scholars came with. Maybe they were going to Tamil language and culture school on the weekend. Maybe they were going to another maybe they were doing catechism in a language that, we weren't offering. So I think it's just so important to recognize as many languages as possible. So I'm really proud of that work and proud of raising the graduation rate for our scholars who are plurilingual as well as our A through G rates. When I got to Anaheim, only 4% of our English learner multilingual scholars qualified for UC and Cal State schools. By the time we were done, close to 25%. That's like, but that's not 100%. But it beat the state averages. And so I'm really proud of the work that we as a team did there. And so, yeah, so this is a lesson for everyone. When I worked at Westminster, I worked for an incredible, I worked for her with her. She was a principal in the district, Dr. Dina Cuses. And she was like a doctor before I was, and I was like, oh, this lady, I have so much to learn from her. So her and I became friends. I supported her at the site. That's what the district people are for. They're to support the sites, right? And the scholars and their success. So Dina actually became a superintendent at a little tiny district, maybe 150 students called Gorman. And so then she was recruited to be the superintendent for Gorman Learning Charter Network. And so she called me saying, hey, Renee, do you know someone? And I said, well, hey, let's talk about that. And so we talked about it. And the lesson is, people, you never know throughout your career how things are going to circle and the networking and connections. Always keep in contact with people. Always keep your values true to your heart. People remember the hard work you do and the values that you have. And so that's kind of a full circle story of how I went from my bilingualism to this position. And I'm excited, to actually expand opportunities for our scholars with languages at Gorman as well.
Perfect. Well, I mean, I think one of the questions I have, right, especially because you've worked in many different teams, and I'm thinking about you also built a team as part of being, part of these organizations and you grew them. I'm thinking about how did you build professional learning for your team? How did you build a community for your team, right? One of the biggest things is supporting your team as you're growing these organizations and these departments. And how did you also manage accountability? And, you have so much leadership insight to offer, and especially with this new role now. I mean, I'm really excited for how you're going to work with your team. I would love to be part of your team. You have so much energy and excitement with everything you do. So I would love to understand a little bit more about how you think about these items, when you're building your team, when you're growing it, and when you're helping them support to kind of achieve new goals and milestones too.
Yeah. So, I'm lucky, right? We all have mentors and people that we've learned from. So, one, I have the university background, and I've also had just really great models of leadership, whether it be in, San Bernardino, Corona Norco, Westminster, or Anaheim. And so, I one, take lessons from people. They can be lessons of what not to do sometimes, and then lessons of what to do. But one thing we know as leaders more than anything is relationships beyond everything, right? So getting to know your team, when you're going in, you need to have a mindset about people, like relationships first. So how are you going? You still have to get the job done, but how are you going to be intentional about your time and getting to know people and listen to them? They have hopes and dreams. They've been there. What are their hopes and dreams for the organization? What are things that they think could be wins? What are things that they think we don't understand why we do this anymore? So just really having what I think Shane Saphir would call with students, but having them with staff, empathy interviews with staff to really understand the organization, the history and the culture. It's always super important. History and culture has existed. So you need to listen. You need to listen and take notes. So if there are things that are very important to people that you cannot touch and things that maybe are okay to move on. And then what's going to take a little more time. And then, of course, You have the board of trustees, for an example, like Westminster. That was a directive to the superintendent, roll out the first Vietnamese dual language immersion program and do it before Garden Grove Unified School District does it, right? There's a political landscape too. So I think, with leaders going in, it's important for them to keep in mind like that human resource of the relationship frame, then the political frame, like what's happening at 5,000 feet, at 10,000 feet, at 50,000 feet. And that's why leadership isn't easy, right? It's not just about one frame, and we all kind of lean into one thing more than another, but we all definitely have to make sure that we're comfortable in each area of leadership. So, yeah, just listening and then, making movement, showing people, saying what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. For me, it's important to meet with teams and to build their capacity. So, in my teams, one of the first books that I have my team read at Westminster, and same with Anaheim Union High School District, was Travis Bradbury book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, because that's all about relationships too. It's all about getting outside of ourselves and thinking about how things land on others, how we affect others with our speech and our actions. And I remember at Laverne when they had us read this book, and there's a little assessment you take before you actually read the book. So you know what area is your weakness and what's your strength, and you have SMART goals around that. And that's what I did with my team. The things I learned at the university, I did with my team.
Yeah.
I said to myself, I wish that I would have got this in high school. That would have been good, or
Yes.
junior high. Maybe I wouldn't have had a couple problems that I had then if I would have read this book, right? So, yeah, those are some things I think, for me going in. I think empowering people, for me, I have a leadership um kind of philosophy that lands on Kouzes and Posner's work of the leadership challenge, which is model the way, inspire shared vision, challenge the process, empower others to act, and encourage the heart. And so for me, I'm constantly thinking of those 5 areas and trying to make sure that I'm constantly modeling what I'm expecting from others, that we have a shared vision, that I'm listening to others, that we are creating things together. This is not me. This is not a silo. This is not my vision. This is our vision. And then, yeah, that whole challenging what things are working, what isn't working. Let's challenge those in a way that's safe and move forward with our vision. And then empowering people. Yeah, this is all about we talk about empowering our scholars. Staff want to feel empowered and trusted as well. So empowering our staff to be able to make moves according to the vision. And then this is actually because my research was around this framework, and the last one is the one that people have the hardest time with, and that is encouraging the heart. Leaders get busy and they don't get encouraged. So let's make it clear that leaders hear all the bad things. So everyone out there, model the way. Like if you want your leaders, to encourage the heart, take a moment, write them a thank you note, and maybe they'll get the hint. But for me, I'm really big on old school thank you notes, making sure on my emails that I'm thanking people, doing things that show that I appreciate the work of others, because the work in education is not easy. I think it was different before, and it is very complex now. And so, you have people giving up a lot of their family time or dedicating a lot of their family time, but still trying to find balance, to scholars, not to their own children. I mean, my Jared, who's in the other room, his mom was a teacher, his grandma was a teacher, and he's like, hey, they spent more time with their kids than they spent with me. So, the children of teachers, feel this pain. And so, yeah, trying to find a balance for educators and encouraging them. And that's part of encouraging them is also to honor their time outside of work and make sure they feel appreciated. So, yeah, that's the framework for me. And then as far as approaching professional learning, I also lean on the work of Shane Saphir, but many people that came before her, which is this idea of like liberatory design. You always go to those who are most affected by something to get their input. So we talk about, surveying scholars or having scholars be a part of lesson design, and how do we engage scholars so we know more about them. Well, everything that we're talking about for scholars are things that are important for our staff. Like, we want to, if you're going to do professional learning for staff, perhaps you have a survey so you know more about them and you could integrate intentionally some of the things that they're interested in into that professional learning. If you're planning out professional learning for the whole year, you want to know what are the things that they need, so that they know that you are actually cognizant of what they need. What are their needs as educators? And we know there are state mandates and there are things that we just have to move on, but how can we move on those, but also align and integrate the things that they're interested in? So the last big professional learning that we did at Anaheim was mandated because we needed to make sure that our ELA teachers could deliver designated ELD for the higher levels within their ELA classes. And so we took all the ELA teachers in the district and little by little, put them through professional learning, those that wanted to come first and second, but got through all of them. And we made sure that not only did we give the professional learning on the integrated standards, but we also made sure that we were using strategies that they could use. We were modeling the things that we would want them to use with their scholars and being intentional about saying, hey, we're doing this on purpose, right? Not to make you crazy, but we are going to run this as if, right? And so we also integrated Matt Miller's book on AI for educators. So we
Oh,
integrated pieces of AI so that they could see, okay, it's not all about just chat GPT, but there are these kind of fun things that we could do with our scholars and integrate them. We integrated work from California Together, some policy work on what best practices were for long-term English learners. We also integrated the work of Dr. Ivania Soto, may she rest in peace, on shadowing students. So, even though you're mandated to do something and maybe not everyone's excited about that, there is a way that you can make them excited by actually honoring what they want. And of course, we fed them and we paid them, and that's a way of encouraging their heart and, really honoring what they want as well. So, yes, part of planning for professional learning is around what is mandated by the state and then or the feds. And then part of it is really or a big part is how are you taking the funds of knowledge of your staff and honoring them? Because our scholars come with funds of knowledge that we need to honor, and our parents do. We talk a lot about that in community schools, but how are we also honoring our staff funds of knowledge and what they come with? So, yeah, I think that's enough. I think
I
that's
love
like
that.
a basic answer on a complex question. Yes.
I love that. And I think it really shows the different kind of areas that you are focused on, the different areas you're looking to. And I think one of the questions, I want to leave our listeners with, and given that you've shared so much about your background and your areas, I want to make it a little bit of a fun question. I want to think, one of the things that maybe have impacted you, one of the advice or tips that you've gotten from a mentor, you've just learned, throughout the years of doing this, you're like, this is something that I wish that I had told my 18-year-old self when I first started in, college or something like that. What is that one advice or maybe one or two pieces of advice that you would go back in a time machine and you would go tell yourself to focus on or to do, if that kind of makes sense?
So smart people sometimes are really focused on getting it done, being outcome focused, right? They can. I'm smart. I can do it. I'll just do it myself, right? And that's not you. That's just people in general, right? So I think going back, I mean, because I was raised in a certain way, right? I had to get really good at making friends fast. So relationships were important, but then I was moved and I lost those relationships. And so, I think that I knew that personal relationships were important. We have to help our scholars to embrace like this whole world is nothing but relationships. And so, emotional intelligence. Like you really have to, like I already said, I wish that I would have had the emotional intelligence book. I wish I had like little mini lessons for elementary. And I think they do with the MTSS, PBIS, all of it, the social emotional learning that is a part of it. That didn't really exist when I was a child. I think for leaders, it's all about relationships. And then you have your core values, and you need to, as we say in our ed branding book, like define your core values, have a board of directors personal for yourself that you're going to check in with. So if you're kind of in a gray area, go to that board of directors that's around that area. and, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. These are my values. I just wanna run it by you." Or, just check in with your board of directors, "Hey, these are my values," because I think sometimes we do have to die on a hill, and that's okay. That's a choice that we make as leaders around our values. Does this make sense? So, no, I'm never, I'm never gonna get fired for doing something illegal. Like, that's not gonna happen, right? So, if I had to choose between, relationships and doing something unethical or illegal or what's bad for children, for scholars, I will side with my values and I will move away from that relationship. But overall, relationships, relationships, relationships. We're all smart enough that we can think of ways, thinking about the other person. We call it the platinum rule. How does the other person want to be treated? How can I frame this? Because it's all about framing with people. So, how do I frame this in a way that this person will receive it? Am I asking questions instead of making comments? Are there questions that I can ask? Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Maybe there's a blind spot that I have. So, yeah, I think that we all talk about relationships, relationships, relationships. And then I think that everyone would do well to map out, then we talk about this in the book too, map out their organization, their team, map out your organization, map out your community. What are intentional relationships that you haven't made yet? Are you just siloed in your department? Are you just siloed at your site? Are you siloed at your site but not really working with the community? Are you siloed in your department? Let's say you're in ed services. Are you working? Are you having lunch here and there with someone from business or someone from HR? When it comes to community, have you gone to a city council meeting? Have you gone to, like, I used to attend the Vietnamese American Chamber of Commerce meetings, what's out there? In a couple weeks, I'll be attending the Pongal celebration in Buena Park for one of the language and culture schools. Yeah. And that's something
Right.
that I was invited to during my time at Anaheim, and I will go again. I have a sorry now. I don't know how to put it on, but I'm gonna
Oh,
bring it and I'm gonna wear it. I mean, yeah, just overall, I think people pausing at one of our podcast or my podcast guests gave some really good advice at this thing of like, if you're feeling like that affective filter going up, if you're feeling yourself flushing, if you're feeling, as people say now, triggered, I think that a great advice that she gave, was to just ask, I wonder if I could have some time to think about this, and I'm gonna stop this meeting, and I would like to reschedule, and thank you so much. I think that those are good things because the alternative is people hurting relationships, right? Or saying the wrong thing, or maybe saying something that if they had more time to think about, they wouldn't say. I think, yeah, just relationships, 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 and leaning into emotional intelligence. And if you as leaders have not read Emotional Intelligence 2.0, there's an updated version. Take the test first, then work your way through those chapters. You will not regret doing that. And then there's also another book called Primal Leadership that I recommend. Of course, I recommend the Leadership Challenge. And then I recommend our book, the Ed Branding book. So if you're curious about how to make sure you're getting the message out about how amazing your site, your school, as parents or as classified staff, teachers, board members, superintendents, leaders of any capacity, we want to make sure that people know how great public ed is or education overall. So check out our book as well.
I love that. And I have taken so many notes just on everything you're saying today. I think it applies not just to education, but to business, to finance, to art, to me, like so many different disciplines, so many different areas. And it's so helpful to hear these tips, these advices, and to hear from your journey. So I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast, for sharing your amazing, amazing journey throughout this. And I learned so much about you that, to be honest, I get a lot of my little bios from LinkedIn, and this is not something you're going to get on there. So I appreciate you so much for taking the time and for giving our listeners an amazing insight into your perspective and your amazing background.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you, and I appreciate you amplifying my voice. And I'm always excited to amplify others. So I'm so excited to amplify your voice as well. Thank you so much.